Today I'm going to answer your questions about moving to Huntsville, Alabama and living here. I'm Cameron Walker, broker owner of Cameron Walker Realty. We're a boutique brokerage that focuses on helping people relocate to the Huntsville area. And because of that, we get a lot of questions about Huntsville and the surrounding areas, what it's like to live here, and what are some surprises you could expect. I get these questions in person, over email, via text. Sometimes they're in the comment sections of my various social media platforms where I post these videos. I get them over LinkedIn. And I mean, just everywhere, right? I see them in online forums. So today I'm going to give you the real juicy answers. We're not going to skip over anything. We're going to talk about the job market, talk about the economy, housing, schools, you name it. We're going to go through it. So if you want to know more about moving to Huntsville, this video is for you. And I'm going to give you some great resources as we go along as well. So I'll link any of those in the video description so you know right where to find them. Okay, the first questions we're going to lead off with surround jobs and the economy. The number one question I'm asked in that category is, besides engineering, besides being a scientist, besides working on Redstone Arsenal or in Cummings Research Park, what other jobs are there? Are there other job opportunities? The short answer to that is absolutely there are. There's actually 4,000 to 5,000 more job openings right now than there were in the peak of COVID when everybody was moving around the country for different jobs. So Huntsville is definitely still hiring. The real question you're asking is, right, is if my spouse or my significant other, or my adult child moves there, are they going to be able to find a rewarding career? You know, if I'm a scientist or an engineer moving here, what can they do? And so Huntsville has a really diversified economy, and it's getting more diversified with time, which we're incredibly thankful for. So initially we were an agricultural city, then we got the Arsenal, then we got NASA, and things have built upon that. So yes, we have that engineering background, all the contractors and subcontractors for missile defense, space, several different government three-letter agencies. But beyond that, we have a lot of manufacturing. Toyota has two different plants here, one with Mazda and one that there's their motor manufacturing. We also have Polaris here who does their manufacturing here and a ton of other places too. We have a lot of logistics, shipping, warehousing. We have a train that comes through. We have waterways that come by, especially if you expand out into like the Decatur and the Guntersville area. We've got 7 different universities here, so education's huge. So many hotels have been built here because we do get a lot of people, and this is tangential to that space and exploration kind of stuff, where we have hotels here for all the different conferences that you'll see coming into the Huntsville area, and that provides service sector jobs. And then we have all the downstream stuff, the restaurants, everything else that comes along with it, realtors, right? So it is getting to be like a very well diversified economy. And I think regardless of what industry you're in, you're going to find openings here. And not just the openings that, hey, we've had this posted on LinkedIn or Indeed for 4 years. These are new, fresh jobs that they are actually hiring for. Second question I see a lot is about the work-life balance of some of these government contractors and subcontractors. And I will say that you're going to experience a wide variety of kind of work-life balance there. There are companies that are, they're off every other Friday or do a half day, and they're not asking you to make that time up during the week. And then there are companies where they want you working 7/10s, and it really kind of depends on a couple of things. If they're a contractor, what their contract states, and what their billing rate, things like that are. If they're a privately held company or if they're publicly traded. And then the prestige level of working there. Some of these companies are really about the mission, right? And so if you're really about that mission, you're going to spend those hours there, and that's what they expect coming in. The good news is there's a lot of resources online about which company's which. And if we ever talk individually, I can certainly tell you some of the ones that I know from past experience with clients and others that really do demand a lot of people. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, just saying you need to know going in. So that's the real question people are asking is, underneath that is, am I expected to work 10-hour shifts 7 days a week? Am I ever going to have downtime? So the answer is yes, just depends on which company you go with. And if you're one of those people that does want to work 7 days a week, be on a really tight mission, we have those companies here too. All right, number 3, and this one's a big concern for a lot of people, is how stable are those government jobs, right? Great time to ask this question. There's been a big change right now in the political environment that's come downstream to those of us that work and live here, particularly in the government employment sector and in the contracting sector. So for decades, we would have said that's a very stable, almost 100% stable, right? The only difference is if companies win or lose a contract. Now we're starting to see some government employees getting laid off or, asked to retire early or what have you. We're not seeing a ton of that. And when you see the numbers in the news, A, understand they're not always accurate, and B, understand that's across the U.S., not necessarily in Huntsville. So a lot of the programs we have here have actually received increased funding. Many companies here are receiving new contracts. So we're still on an upward trajectory as far as growth in our economy and our jobs. And as I mentioned earlier in the video, we're 4,000 to 5,000 jobs in the hole beyond where we were. And just so you have an absolute number on that, there's 14,000 jobs open on Indeed in the Huntsville area right now. So we're definitely hiring. The jobs are here. They are secure. Now, I have had people that they rolled off of one contract or they were laid off from one, and next week they were in another. It really depends on your skill set, and I would say it really depends on how much you network once you're here. Once you're, say, like cybersecurity, right? Cybersecurity guys are a really close knit group, and you can get to know guys from different companies or gals, and when your seat gets vacated, right, they may have an opening for you, and it's literally just driving across the street to go take that job. So I hear about that all the time. I have a lot of people that work in the industry that are friends, past clients, that reach out to me like, hey, do you know anybody looking for this? That's actually something I'm starting to explore. Is let's say you have a trailing spouse, significant other that's looking for work. Starting to see how I can connect those dots between that person and a hiring manager or HR or recruiter at a company. So stay tuned for that. That's something we'll be offering in the near future. But as it stands right now, I do have people literally reaching out to me because they know I work primarily with people relocating to the area, and they're asking like, hey, do you have somebody, software devs are huge, cybersecurity is huge. There's a lot of those kind of jobs that companies are hiring for. Another question I get frequently, especially as we go into the kind of the gig economy and we see a lot of AI usage and startups and stuff, is Huntsville a good environment for startups? And what you're really asking is there funding, is there mentorships, are there spaces? And I will say it's better than it was, but that's not some monumental increase. So we do see more incubators coming in the area, a little bit more VC. We do see more mentorship programs, leadership programs, and we do see more interest in investing in some of these smaller companies. Now, I started my company 2 years ago, but it was real estate. You could start that literally anywhere. But if you're talking about a tech sector or something like that, or just even like restaurants and other things like other service areas, we are seeing more growth there. We are seeing more interest from money wanting to go in those directions too. There's a lot of resources you can find online. I'll try and link some down below, but that is something that we're seeing more and more of. Are we Silicon Valley? No. Are we threatening them? No. But are we better than we were 5 years ago? Absolutely. All right, next category we're going to go into is cost of living. One of the first questions I'm asked here is like, hey, I know houses are a little less expensive, property taxes are lower, but what should I really budget for when I move there? Underlying question here is A, are those numbers accurate? And B, what else do I not know, right? So one that I think would surprise a lot of people is flood insurance, right? We don't have a ton of flooding here, but we do have areas that are in flood zones. Those flood zone policies can go into the thousands of dollars a year, depending on where you are, and it's all situational. But that's a surprise to some people, and those are annual premiums. They're not, one and done. A lot of people think we may need separate insurance for tornadoes. You don't. To my knowledge, any insurance policy I've ever been involved with, and I used to sell insurance, tornado damage was covered under those policies. I'm not saying every insurer does that, but I've never heard of any of my clients having to get a separate rider for tornado damage. So they're just not as prevalent here as, the damage isn't as prevalent as maybe the media makes it seem. So there's not a need for the insurance companies to charge extra for it. Utilities here are pretty affordable. They run very close to the national average. I will say we see a spike in those in the summer because it is very hot and humid here, and our ACs are kicking on more often. But by and large, Alabama has a ton of waterways. We use a lot of hydroelectric power, and that keeps it really affordable. We're not necessarily basing our power and our consumption and our pricing based on natural resources and fossil fuels. We do have this opportunity with all this flowing water to get really inexpensive electricity. Coast of Alabama also has a lot of natural gas, so that's been inexpensive for us as well compared to many other parts of the country. When we talk about groceries, they're a little below average. When we talk about gas for your car or vehicles, that's significantly below average. A lot of that is distilled, or not distilled, but refined here in the Southeast. We're very close to those refineries as far as the grand scheme of things, and we don't have too many tax overlays on top of it. We do have some gas tax here in Alabama, but it's not so significant that makes gas anywhere near what the coastal areas are like. Another question I get a lot is, how does my salary from DC, Seattle, San Francisco, how does that translate to the Huntsville area? Am I going to keep that salary, and how much, what's my lifestyle going to be like if I do keep that salary versus if I don't? First thing I want to say is, if you have the opportunity to move here for a remote position and you're getting paid like you're in one of those localities, absolutely do it. You'll live like a king. If you make $200,000 or above here, like, you really do have a wonderful quality of life. And if you make lower than that, you still have a great quality of life too. But if you have that opportunity, I would definitely take advantage of it. But as far as what can you expect to get paid here? I think in many cases, if you're coming from one of those bigger coastal cities where their high cost of living, or very high cost of living, right? You probably are going to see a haircut in your salary coming here. But on average, Huntsville salaries are 10K above the national average. And our cost of living is anywhere from 8 to 13% lower on average. It can be more or less than that, of course, but that's a pretty big delta, right? Think if we pegged it between that 8 to 13, said there was a 10% lower cost of living, you're getting paid on average 10% higher than the national average. That delta of 20% is awesome. That leads to a great quality of life, gives you some disposable income, allows you to make choices about where to spend your income monthly, how much to save, how much to put into retirement. And these may not be options where you are now due to the cost of living. So there's plenty of calculators out there, and I may link one below. I actually have one on my website now that I think about it. I'll put a link to that page where you can drop in, say, hey, I work in Charlotte, make $80,000, I'm moving to Huntsville. What does that translate into salary? Or, hey, I'm moving to Huntsville, I got an offer of $99,000. What does that compare to in New York, where I live now, right? Like, you can do these comparisons online. I always say use multiple sources, right? Like, one resource may be great, but always look at others and take into account your own personal situation. Do you have a lot of health concerns? Do you have more kids than the average family? Are you single? Do you like a hot house so you don't run your AC as much during the summer? Factor in those personal things as well when you're looking at what your budget's going to be like. All right, here's a question that gets asked a lot. I have to be a little cagey about my answer. It's really around things that are protected statuses. So protected statuses are like familial status, married, unmarried, kids, not kids, sexual orientation, gender, ethnicity, race, disability. These are all protected classes when it comes to real estate, and I can't steer you one direction based on any given answer on this, right? But I understand these are realistic questions you need to ask and you need answers for your lifestyle, for your comfort level. So I'm going to give you some resources, tell you a little bit. So I've worked with people from every different background. I've never had one of them call me back and be like, hey, this was a bad choice. So I'll put it that way, right? Without hitting any nails on the head. I think that the online forums are the way to go to answer this question, because if you're part of a specific community, I think you need to hear the answers from that specific community. I'm not going to be the first person somebody calls when there's a racial issue in Huntsville, right? That's just not how it works. Nobody thinks to call their realtor about that. I'm the one they call if their sprinkler system doesn't work a month after they move in, right? Or they need an HVAC guy 2 years later. So I would say go online, look for larger resources at first, get a kind of global look at it, and then dial into those specific communities, see if there's some resources there for you. Reddit is a great source for this. You go to r/Huntsville, Alabama. I see these questions on there quite a bit, and I do see people chiming in to answer, and they give very realistic firsthand experiences, right? Some of the Facebook groups are great as well. I will say Facebook, you get a lot more opinion from people who are not in that community, and they're, that may be worth it too, to know what the other half thinks, right? So just bear that in mind. You need to look at the resources that are specific to your situation, the question you're asking, because we as real estate agents are legally stopped from answering many of these questions because it would be considered steering. Those questions are often followed up by questions about familial status. Hey, we're a family of four. We've got two kids. Is Huntsville the right place for us? Or I don't have kids. Should I move to Huntsville? Is it just like, nothing but playgrounds and, bicycles everywhere, right? So again, I can't go into this too much, but what I can tell you is I myself, my family's family of four. We have two young kids. We moved here 6 years ago. My oldest is just now going into middle school. So it kind of gives you an idea of the age range we've been in since we've been here. We've had a phenomenal experience. We have a lot to do as a family. But then my wife and I also have a lot to do when we go out on date nights, right? So I would say that there's a widespread. What I will say is if you're one of those people who wants to go out all night, you're looking for the late night bars, they are few and far between. And if you don't like the one or two that are open, you're not going to like any of them because the rest of them are closed. So we are not a late night town. We're getting more so. We're seeing some restaurants starting to stay up later. We're seeing more bars come into town. But by no means are we a Birmingham and Atlanta, Nashville, right? Some of these other large southeastern cities that do have a really extensive nightlife. Huntsville used to have a little bit more. That was kind of already, it was never doing great. And then COVID really killed it. So I'm not saying it'll never bounce back, but I wouldn't expect there to be much even when it does. Now, I do see a lot of questions from people, especially like on Reddit and on Facebook, asking about like dating scene. I've been married for 15 years, so that's not really a question I have. What I do see is there are a lot of people asking about where to go meet the other gender, sex, whatever they're looking for. And it's like, well, you guys got to get out and meet people, right? There are a lot of opportunities to network and meet people here. There are a lot of meetup groups. If you're religious, there's a lot of church organizations and other religious organizations. There's a lot of academic and professional organizations and meetups. If you're into biking, kayaking, whatever, there's tons of groups, running, book clubs, supper clubs. There's all kinds of stuff here. I have a website on my or a page on my website. It's dedicated to relocation, and in there I even have like a link to the meetup section, so I'll drop that below so you have it as well. But there's so many different organizations you can join or informal groups too, so you can definitely get out and meet people. And of course that's the best way to get into the dating pool is to meet others. So I would recommend not being a curmudgeon, not being a shut-in. You need to get out and meet people. And when I see this online and I see these questions answered, a lot of times that's the recommendations that are given. Along that same vein, I see people and hear from people constantly asking, like, hey, I'm a transplant. Am I going to be able to make friends? Am I going to be welcomed? Is it going to be, get out of here, you damn Yankee, or something like that? Huntsville's not that way. We're not necessarily a transient community, but we do have people from all over the U.S. and quite frankly, all over the world. Just in my own career here, I've helped people move here from all 6 habitable continents. And as soon as somebody's born in Antarctica, I'm going to get them too. So we are truly a melting pot. We have people from all over, which does mean we have people looking for culture. We have people looking for those social bonds. So you're not going to be the only new person here. And the existing people here really well educated. They are not, your typical what you see on the news about the Alabama person, right? So they are looking for those social bonds as well. They are very accepting of others. I would say in Huntsville, rather than have an argument, we like to have a debate, right? And I think that's a great place to be. So there are definitely places that will welcome you. In general, the culture is very welcoming. It's not as southern as some areas. It's not that you can go into every gas station, they know your name, and you're going to talk for 2 hours. But people are pleasant. People are accepting. They are looking for their own social circles, so you can jump in. You don't feel like you're boxed out. All right. Along that line, I get asked all the time, what do people do for fun? And this can be a little tricky to answer. There's so much to do here, particularly outdoors. But if you're not an outdoors person, then what do you do? So I'm going to tackle these together. So first off, if you like the outdoors, you come in the right place. It is hot as fire for 2 months every summer. July and August are burning up. But the rest of the year, the other 10 months, outstanding weather, particularly compared to many other areas. Yes, we get cold in the winter, but you can play golf all winter, right? Very few times we're going to be throughout the year where you can't get outdoors. Kayaking, fishing, hiking, hunting, anything you want to do outdoors, shooting, archery, dog sports. I mean, gosh, there's a million and one things. If you can do it in the sunshine, you can do it here. The other thing I'll say is there's a lot of indoor activities. Particularly, like, I'm very child focused, right? Having a family with 2 young kids. So, indoor gymnasiums, sports teams, museums, I mean, tons of those, all kinds of stuff like that. And then there's a lot of sporting events. So, we have several like minor league S teams. So, we have the Trash Pandas who play baseball here in Madison. We've got the new Huntsville Football Club. We've got the Huntsville Havoc hockey team. So we have a lot of that. There's a lot of high school sports. There is a lot to do. We just got the new Orion Amphitheater, so we've had some really large, big name concerts there, as well as a lot of festivals. I mean, that's something we don't talk about enough. There's like from like May to October, there's like 8 to 10 farmers markets every single weekend. They're spread all over, and I might be undershooting that, to be honest. And some of those come along with little festivals, right? Like they have people there selling their artwork or what have you. And then we have festivals throughout the year. Some of them are in places like Low Mill where they're like every weekend. And then some places it's, an annual or quarterly kind of thing. And they're spread out. They're not all in one place. They don't all have one vibe. So there's a lot to do here. Outdoors, there's tons of biking, hiking, running trails. So that's another thing, kind of backtracking on that outdoors a little bit. There's a lot to do that way too. There are a lot of civic and social organizations that I kind of mentioned earlier, and there's a lot of stuff that flies under the radar. Like I have clients that are really big into quilting and came along and told me after they moved here, they discovered this whole like underground quilting community, and some of the people there are a really big name, and who would have known, right? So there's all kinds of stuff like that. All right, a big one and a hot topic right now is actually traffic, right? So we're moving on to a little bit more of the logistics of living in the Huntsville area. So Huntsville has laughable traffic compared to much of the U.S. When you're looking at any larger city, the traffic in Huntsville, it's just a pale comparison to that. When I moved here from the DC area, I mean, it was such a breath of fresh air. I drive all over the city. I drive at all different times a day. The one exception I will say to that, especially since there's been the return to work order, is getting on Redstone Arsenal. We are seeing pretty bad backups, particularly if there's any kind of accident that's blocking one gate, funneling everybody towards another. And I would start factoring that into where you buy a home, because you are seeing longer and longer commutes getting into there. It's not hard to get there. It's just once you get there, you are in a long line. The Arsenal's updated the way that they kind of security badge people in, and sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. I see a lot of complaints online about it. My neighbors are having a difficult time getting in, and of course, school buses, right? Like in a school time. So everybody gets their kid on the bus, drops them off to school, heads over to the Arsenal, going to work. And so you have a big pile up there during those kind of peak rush hour times. How long does it take? Depends if you actually look at people's watch or if you hear what they say. It took me an hour to get on. It took them 25 minutes, So just bear that in mind. A great resource for this is actually Google Maps. You can go on there and adjust the time that you're looking at getting to work, right? So you can say my arrival time or my departure time and see how long either end of that takes. And you can set that for what day of the week, all that. So if you go in Monday through Friday and you want to know what Wednesday traffic is going to look like, go pick Wednesday. If you need to be there at 8:30, pick 8:30. It'll tell you what time you need to leave. Pad that a little bit maybe until you get used to the commute here and know the time. But that would be a great resource, and you can do that from afar. You don't have to be sitting here in Huntsville to test that out. Okay, the next two questions kind of bleed into a little bit of the housing market, but because they do kind of stand a little bit with this logistics too, I'm going to tackle them well. So get a lot of questions about new construction. Where are those communities at? What communities are coming on? Which communities are about to close out? Some of that has to do with location, pricing, incentives, and some of that has to do with like what are my options 6 months from now? Both, what's it going to cost me? Where can I live? What options am I going to have available to me? So this is an area where I spend a lot of time, right? I've worked with almost every single builder here. My team is working with a lot of builders. I think we have 6 or 7 new construction homes under contract, and we just closed a bunch out. And they're all with all different builders, all different parts of town. So what I will say is there's not going to be a shortage of new construction homes anytime soon. We are still seeing our builders putting houses in the ground. They are doing really well. in comparison to how they've performed in previous years as far as making up a percentage of the sales. And that really comes down to people do like the new product, particularly in a buyer beware state. You get a lot of advantages with newer construction, and especially new builds specifically. There's a lot of incentives right now, so the builders are competing in this higher interest rate environment to bring buyers to them. And then there's a lot of interest rate incentive, particularly for the builders that already own their own lender or are very tight knit with them. They're getting interest rates 2 to 3% below the market rate. And for every 1% drop in interest rate, that's your payment reflects as if you bought a 10% lower priced home or borrowed 10% less money. That's huge. In this environment where we saw such a rapid rate increase and we're not really staring down the barrel of a lot of them going down anytime soon, being able to buy a house at 2% below the market rate is huge for most people. Now, depending on how long you're going to finance that, maybe getting some money off the top line number of the house would be better. But that's a conversation we would have at that time. So suffice to say, there are a lot of new communities coming online. There are a lot of builders that are adding additional phases, and there's not a lot of them closing out, because while they are selling a higher percentage relative to the market has really balanced out. Things aren't flying off the shelf like they used to. So, you do have options. What I will say is going here into Q3 and Q4 is the time to buy new construction, particularly if you're going to buy a spec or inventory home. These are homes that the builder's already started or finished and they're looking to sell. No matter who the builder is, no matter if they're publicly traded or they're John's builder and he's got 2 houses he builds at a time, they finance those builds one way or another. And they want to pay off whatever that financing is, whether it's internal, whether it's they borrowed money from somebody else, whether they basically floor plan these lots like a car dealership would. They have paid for that land, that lumber, that labor, and they want to get their money back. So they offer better incentives typically on those spec and inventory homes than what they'll offer on a to-be-built home. They're also typically more willing to negotiate on them too. We've had a great run this year of negotiating with new construction and new builds. Not every builder does, not every house will they negotiate on, but in many, many cases they will. We've had some really good runs and got some great incentives for our clients this year. And we're not the only ones doing that. So just so you know, the market is receptive to that. All right, hand in hand with that question is what areas have peaked, what areas are up and coming, what areas are kind of stable. So I will say like the entire Huntsville region is still growing. We're still having roughly 20 people moving here a day, which, if you're in New York or LA, that's like a drop in the bucket. When you're Huntsville, that's a significant number of people moving here every year. And so people are buying in the city, they're moving out into the suburbs, moving out even to the exurbs. What I will say is we see a premium on rural, especially acreage. We see a premium on really convenient locations. That kind of middle ground, right? Those 3-4 bedroom houses, kind of not all the way out in the rural areas, but they're on the edge of the suburbs, is where we start to see a little more play in the pricing and then incentives, be it new construction or existing homes. It's where we might see prices modulate up and down throughout the year. So like we just literally today got the print on the July 2025 numbers, and depending on what county you're in, what market you're in up here, they were up and down a little bit, right? So I think on average, they went up by 3,000 for the median price, should say. But like Huntsville, Madison market actually dropped a little bit. So we're seeing these fluctuations month over month, year over year. And what that tells me is we're really in a balanced market. So sellers will pull their house off. They can't get the price they want. They'll sit there for 6 months with their house priced with what they want. I know because I'm dealing with this with some of my clients too. And, they don't have to sell. They have a great interest rate. They own the house cash. But all that say, they can also be spiking prices up either. There's 5,000 homes on the market, or very close to, so there's plenty of options to choose from. And somebody out there does want to sell their house at a price that's attractive to buyers, right? Many people do. So all that to say, I wouldn't say there's necessarily a big up and coming area. There was a play in Athens last year in Limestone County. I feel like they've kind of caught up to the rest of the market. They're still growing really fast. So I would say that's up and coming area as far as like percentage growth. But as far as like pricing, I mean, I think your Hazel Green, Tony, you're still going to be some of the lowest prices. I do see a movement towards Gurley, towards Arab, towards Gunnersville, I do see a movement south of the river towards the Union Grove area, but we're not talking huge numbers. So these could just be little blips, right? They could be almost a fad as opposed to a movement. So I would say outskirts of Madison, always been a good area. Limestone County, East Limestone, Athens area, those are great too. And then if you get out to like Hazel Green, Tony, you can get some amazing deals out in that area. All right, a question that's near and dear to my heart is how are the schools really, right? A lot of cases, what people are asking here is should I really target Madison? Should I target the county? Should I target Huntsville? Are my kids going to be able to read? I know this is Alabama and they're not known for their education system here. So, what I will say is Huntsville has some of the highest ranking schools, and the surrounding area of Huntsville, I should say. What I'll say is Huntsville and the surrounding area have some of the highest ranking schools in the state of Alabama and even nationally. So some of these are private schools, some of them are public schools, but overall there's some amazing schools here. My kids are in the Madison City School District. It ranks really high regardless of whether you're looking at greatschools.org, niche.com, U.S. News and World Report, which are three of the main publications I look at to really see what a school district's doing or a specific school. And that gives you a very well-rounded, because they're not just looking at test scores. They're looking at parental input. They're looking at diversity. They're looking at college readiness. So they're looking at a lot of different things when they give those scores, and they weight them differently, right? So when you look across 3 or 4, you get a different average and a different perspective, I should say, or a more well-rounded one. So I'll say this. We've had an amazing experience at Madison City Schools. They've been everything everybody promised for us. I have friends and past clients who are in Madison County School, absolutely love it. They have some amazing, not just classes and schools, but also like after school programs and extracurricular activities. Same thing that we experience in Madison City. And then Huntsville has some truly amazing schools. The cyber technology school is like world class. There's magnet schools there. Huntsville High has like won like every swimming, state championship going back as far as anybody can remember. So there are a lot of great schools here. Now there are schools that don't rank as high. And I think using some of those resources that I just pointed you towards would be a great idea, no matter what school district you're in or what high school you're targeting. One word of caution, I'll give a couple words of caution. First is schools do redistrict. So you can't necessarily buy a house and guarantee yourself that you'll be in that school district in perpetuity. You won't change from, I say school district, you won't be in that specific school zone. So like if you're in Huntsville High, there's no guarantee you'll always be Huntsville High. It could transfer to another high school. You won't go from Huntsville to Madison City or Huntsville to Madison County or any of the other directions. If you're zoned for a school district, you will be in that school district. Another thing I want to mention is the city of Madison. This throws people off. You will find complaints every single month. This happens to somebody that I see online. Madison is both a city and a county, but is also just a post office, right? So you could be in East Limestone, zoned for East Limestone schools, paying East Limestone taxes, voting in East Limestone elections, and have a Madison mailing address. But you could also be in East Limestone, have a Madison mailing address, and be in Madison City, and be in Madison City schools, and pay Madison taxes and vote in those elections, right? You could have a Madison address and be in Huntsville. You could have a Madison address and be in Athens now, and you could have a Madison address and be in Madison County. So if you are specifically targeting Madison City, you need to understand where those boundaries are and if the house that you're looking for is there. And I hate to say it, don't trust the MLS on this. If that is important to you, is what specific city or school zone you're in, we need to confirm that for any house that you're going to make an offer on. I cannot stress this enough. Like I said, there are people who have bought multiple $100,000 homes that are now in the wrong area. They're driving past 3 schools to get to the one that their kids go to. I literally saw somebody complaining about this online about a week and a half ago, and they didn't even know there were 3 different school districts. So like, they're not being informed. I'm informing you. This is something you need to know if that's important to you. The other thing that comes along with that is your property taxes. So some of the areas have higher property taxes. In many cases, that is to account for sending money to the schools, whether it's building new ones or resources. So understand that too. If you don't have kids or school zone isn't important to you, you may want to target some other area than Madison, because Madison has the highest local property taxes. Now, they're laughable compared to many other states, but locally they're higher. All right, next section we're going to go into is talking a little bit more about the real estate market, the house buying process. I frequently get a question, especially for people that live out of the area: why are homes on Zillow showing that they went under contract on the first day, particularly when it comes to new construction? This one of two things is happening here. With new construction, the builder held back on that inventory and they didn't list it in MLS till it was under contract. This could be a spec home where they have already broken ground, started construction, maybe if it's even done, but they don't want to advertise they have 12 of those. They don't want to put 3 on the market. When you come in, they'll talk to you about the other 9. Or it could be a ground up construction where they didn't put it in MLS till it was done. So those would be 2 reasons you'd see that on the new construction side. On the resale side, a lot of times that's a pocket listing, and that can happen for a few different reasons. I'm not a huge fan of pocket listings because I don't think it gives the seller all the opportunity to find the buyer. And of course, when I'm representing buyers, I want to see every house out there, right? But that could be somebody that needs to sell before they move. They may need more time to find that next house after they go under contract. So there may be an agent who kind of brokers that deal a little bit off market. And then once everything's settled, they throw it up on the MLS because we're required to do that. And it also creates better comps for the area. And we always want to put more data in rather than less. So that would be 2 reasons you would see that: either a pocket listing on the resale or a builder that's manipulating their inventory, or it's just a ground up build they didn't put in until the very end. All right, one of the more juicy questions I get asked when it comes to buying and selling houses is about those closing costs and incentives. Really ran the gamut a lot on the new construction incentives earlier, so I'm not going to revisit that. What I will say is on the resale market, we are definitely being able to negotiate more in. And when we're representing sellers, we're getting asked for a lot too. So I know there was the NAR settlement last year. Some of you may be familiar with that, where you're having to sign a buyer agency agreement in advance and promise to pay your buyer agents a certain amount of percentage. We don't do that in Alabama anymore. We do that at the time of contract, and it's part of our negotiations, which is exactly what it should be. If you're wanting a 1% discount on the house and I'm asking for whatever percentage on commission, maybe we can work that out so that you get what you want, right? So that's how it should be. And that's how we do it here in Alabama now. So that's a huge leg up from other areas. But what about closing costs? What about discounts on the house? What about repairs? These are all things that we can negotiate. I don't know if you haven't watched a podcast that we do called Boomtown. Megan Hines and I put that out every 2 weeks. We had a great episode on negotiations, and we got into the nitty gritty, even telling stories of clients we were working with in the moment. I would highly recommend you go back and check that one out, because we talk about it both from a resale perspective and from a new construction perspective. But the short answer is yes, the market is wide open because it's balanced. We can certainly negotiate. Now, I will say there's an absolute value for these homes as far as the market's concerned, and the seller in most cases isn't trying to get out from underneath it and lose their shirt. Don't come in here expecting that you're just going to lowball everything. If you are, you're talking to the wrong agent. I will gladly help you get a deal. I will gladly help you negotiate an awesome purchase price or incentives, discounts, closing costs, whatever. But I'm not going to go around town making dollar offers on $1 million houses. We're not in that kind of market, and that's the wrong expectation to have coming in here. All right. Along with those negotiations, things like that, get a lot of questions about the older homes here. Now, I'm a big proponent of new construction, and then large part that is because we're in a buyer beware state, meaning there's very little in the way of seller disclosure laws, and those are pretty easy to skirt, unfortunately. So in Alabama, they only have to disclose if it's a known health or safety issue, if they're a realtor and it's a known issue, or if you ask directly about it and they know the answer. How do we prove that, right? So that can be a little tricky. So what I will say is inspections are really important, and especially the older the home, the less it's been maintained or updated. And sometimes even with those, right? We don't want to think about what's behind the walls, or we should think about what's behind the walls, excuse me, when not just look at the fresh coat of paint over it. So inspections are really important. We need to know in what area of town you're buying, what that age of that home is, because there could be galvanized or lead piping. There could be asbestos in the home. There could be lead paint. There's all these different things we have to consider. And then that's not even getting into the maintenance of the home, how old the roof is, the HVAC, the foundation, what kind of condition those are in. So what I will say is I could go on for hours about any given home in any different part of town. But inspections, and it starts with our walkthrough. If we can see it with our naked eye, imagine what we can't see, right? We need to bring in a really thorough, well-vetted home inspector. You're welcome to hire anybody you want, but I have some really good guys that I like to recommend. If we see things that are amiss, but we still like the home, we need to negotiate some things, we will. We have some contractors that we trust. They'll actually do the job for the money that they bid, and it'll be great work. So we can bring them in and get an understanding of what this is actually going to cost to remediate or repair. So there's a lot of different things we can do there. And then a lot of times we just negotiate either off the price or cash towards closing, because maybe you want to take care of it after you move in, or maybe it's an older roof, but it's not leaking yet and you're going to wait it out, right? So there's a lot of room for negotiation, but inspections when it comes to those older homes. And in some cases, maybe we do a pre-purchase inspection, or we try and get some special contingency in there that it's subject to how much you like the inspection, because that's not typical in our contracts, which you may experience in other states, particularly West Coast. So just keep that in mind. Can't just walk away in an Alabama contract unless it's something that's health or safety related. All right. A lot of people want to know, is there, a lot of multiple offers? Are there bidding wars? And I will say we did experience some of that this year, particularly at the higher end of the price range. It was kind of a upside down bell curve, U-shape. The really, really low priced homes are getting a lot more attention, say sub 275, and the higher priced homes, 700-800 and up. We had one situation where there was $750,000 home, bid 50K over it, didn't get it, right? There were 4 offers. So, that does happen. Then we see homes that sit on the market for 6 months. So it just depends. If the house is priced appropriately, shows well, is in a great location, the listing agent, the sellers did a good job of maintaining the home, making sure it looked good online and that it matched that in person, there can be bidding wars and there can be multiple offers. It's a little less than that going into the fall season. A lot of times that's a rush to get somewhere by summer, particularly families with kids, but then even the families that don't have kids or the individual buyers that just happen to be in that pool with everybody else at that time. So that's what happens. So as we go into the fall and the winter, we see less of that, but not to say it's never going to happen. By and large, we have a very balanced market. You're not going to run into many multiple offer situations unless you're just going after the most desirable, unique properties. And there's 12 other families out there looking for that too, right? All right, a big misconception, one I'm asked about frequently, is about property taxes. I was having this conversation with somebody yesterday. So property taxes that you see on Zillow, are those accurate? Maybe, maybe not. So we tax in arrears. So you're seeing, and it's taxed based on what the county or city assesses the value of the home, and that can lag the true value of the home. So when you buy it, that may update. I had a video several months ago with Craig Paulus on the podcast. He's a local title attorney, and he told me that they're not supposed to chase the sales price, but in my experience, that's what I'm seeing. So who's to say? But that's what I prep my clients for. So the county might have assessed the home at $450. You bought it at $480. Suddenly the taxes are based off $480. I think we all know what's happening there. We do offer a homestead exemption, which cuts your property taxes in half based on it being your primary residence. Even secondary residents get a huge discount. If you are 65 or older, there's a discount off the state portion of property taxes. That's relatively low, but every penny counts. If you have 100% disability, you can get your entire taxes waived as long as it's permanent. So there's a lot of that going on, but what you see on Zillow may or may not reflect any of that. If you bought a house that was previously an investment property or not somebody's primary residence, the remainder of that year, you're going to pay that full rate. It'll be the next year before you can drop down to the homestead exemption. And then if you buy new construction, that's really tricky because that builder most likely has been paying for that as unimproved land. You take ownership on it, county gets flagged. Hey, now there's a house here. The builder gave you $200 for their, portion of the year prorated, and then you got to pay the other $6,000, right? So again, that's because there's not a homestead exemption, and now there's a house on it. Next year, your property taxes drop down to $3,000, but that is something you have to plan for in advance with these newer construction homes. All right, going to go back in the inspection area is how much does an inspection cost and what should they be looking for? This runs a gamut, and I'm going to hit all the high points. A typical home inspection here for, say, a 2,500, 3,500 square foot home, you're looking anywhere from $450 to $600 for a basic home inspection. It's going to be a thorough inspection. It's going to last 3 or 4 hours. You're going to test all the systems, all that, right? If you need to go beyond that, a termite inspection may cost you about $150, and I highly recommend them whether or not you have a mortgage. If you have a mortgage, they're probably going to require it. A lot of times sellers have a termite bond where their house is already being treated, so we can get that transferred over, and a lot of times that termite company will provide a letter, maybe free, maybe cost $100. So I'd say $100 to $150 for termite. Then any specialty things beyond that, if you're looking at like a roof inspection or foundation or sewer scoping, you're probably looking at anywhere from $400 to $1,000 depending on the service. So like I several times in the past, I've had to have a licensed engineer come out and check out a house. Usually it's about $450 for them to come out and just look at the house and decide if they need to do anything further. But just that site visit and getting a kind of initial assessment of it's about $450. I've had sewer scope. They're anywhere from $400 to $800. So that's not common in our area, but a lot of people moving here, that is common in their area. So they want to do it here. Surveys. So most of our homes, especially in our neighborhood, are plotted at the city or the county. Those aren't perfect. Most people here don't get a survey. However, if you do, I've seen them as low as $400, and the highest one I've ever seen for just a quarter acre lot was $1,500, and that was a commercial deal, but it was the size of a single family. Recently had one where they had to go out and check the stakes on a vacant lot. The stakes were already there, and that one cost $600, and it took 3 weeks for them to get out there. So that's the other thing with surveys is they could potentially delay your closing. So if you're going to have one, we got to know up front so we can set a date and know if that's going to impact our closing date. And that way you're not out of contract because you can't close on time because you're still waiting on your survey. I do recommend getting surveys. Like I'm never going to talk you out of it. But they are expensive. They are time consuming. And in many cases, they come back with exactly what was on the plot. As a matter of fact, I haven't had one that didn't. So, but again, like I'm never going to talk you out of being more safe than sorry. All right, infrastructure. I'm going to lump all these together. A lot of people ask about, utility bills that I covered earlier as part of the cost of living. A lot of people ask about high-speed internet. I get it. Alabama has a lot of rural areas, and people are worried about that. If you're anywhere in one of the city, one of the close-in suburbs, you're going to have high-speed internet. Google's here. I think they're now selling 8 gig up and down. I have lightning fast internet at my house, and I don't have Google. I have AT&T. There are some lower cost providers here that are very spotty. One in particular, and I'll tell you about it if we ever talk in person. Every time it rains, theirs goes out. So if you work from home or just you want to watch Netflix on rainy days, maybe they're not the best one to get. My neighbor used them for years, always had problems, and he's now brought in AT&T like I have as a backup. So, or maybe he maintains the old one as a backup. But anyway, there are great providers here. Until you get out into the really rural areas, you're not going to run into issues with not having high-speed internet, cable, things like that. There are areas that still get satellite, right? So it's not ubiquitous. It's not everywhere. But, for the most part, you're not going to have any troubles with that. All right, kind of moving into health and wellness. Allergies. If you have allergies, they're probably going to impact you here. We do have things that are probably different flowers and pollens than what you experience where you are, but we have a lot of them. We have a great growing season, so stuff is constantly going into bloom throughout the year. I don't have horrible allergies, but in the spring they do hit me. My kids have worse. They get hit a little harder. Zyrtec, Claritin generally takes care of it. But if allergies are a huge issue for you, we may not be the right place. We definitely get hit. Hay fever is also relatively common here. So again, we have when it's 80 in your fall, 80 degrees, 75 degrees, things still bloom. So, we do run into that. A lot of people ask about bugs. We definitely have bugs. We definitely have mosquitoes. You folks up north, I don't know how y'all live. Y'all have pterodactyls up there. We have little teeny tiny mosquitoes. When you're out in the sunlight, generally they don't bug you. They like to hang out on patios, under shady trees, things like that. They'll get you in the morning and the evening. Bug spray generally does a good job of preventing that. Along that same vein, people ask about being able to get doctors and nurses here. That has gotten better here recently. It used to be when you moved here, you were like on a real waiting list for most services, medical services. I've seen where people are getting in to see their new doctors within 30 days. I still recommend if you're moving here from somewhere else, and especially if you're on a daily prescription, get a full refill of that before you move here, because if it does take you a little while to meet somebody, then you want to have that on hand, right? But by and large, people are doing well. Get a lot of questions about the local hospitals here. I will say the emergency room wait time seems to be a constant gripe, but I also tend to think that comes from people who don't need to be in an emergency room. They're waiting 8 hours, and it's not like they went in for surgery or something, right? So they went to the emergency room instead of going to a doctor. So it seems to be the people that really need to be treated are getting treated. There actually was just an award to the hospital. They're going to expand their emergency services center, so that's great. It kind of depends on what you need. I know a lot of geriatric style stuff here is scored really well. And then we're about an hour and a half south of Nashville, which has a great children's hospital. And then we're about an hour and a half north of Birmingham that has everything under the sun. Great. UAB there is a phenomenal world-renowned hospital. I went to school there, and at one point, like one of the Saudi royal family went there. They like blocked off a whole like level. Anyway, people pay a lot of money to go to UAB for treatment, so it's a great place, and it's not that far away if you have some specialty condition that you need to have treated. All right, another frequent question is about the look and feel of different areas, and it can be really tricky for people that don't live here. So, in all the photographs and videos of Huntsville, you see mountains and green and all that. That is typically on the east side of Huntsville. So southeast Huntsville all the way up to northeast Huntsville, over to Owens Crossroads, Gurley. That is the more mountainous side of Huntsville. There is Rainbow Mountain in Madison, and there are a couple like Wade Mountain and stuff a little north of town. But by and large, the mountainous, beautiful green scenery that you see is over on the east side. These are low-lying mountains. I went to Colorado this past summer and like got altitude sickness and all that. You're not going to get altitude sickness in our mountains, okay? They're like 2 minutes to drive up and over. You're done. There are some windy, curvy passes. So if you live or work in Huntsville and you have to go the opposite direction or vice versa into Owens Crossroads, Cecil Ashburn's a little more windy, curvy. The road going up over Montesano is a little less so, still has its curves, but it's not nearly as windy curvy as Cecil Ashburn. So depending on your tolerance level, that may or may not work for you, right? So some of the higher elevations do get a little bit more snow. And then, there's some beautiful vistas there. Absolutely stunning. We have a lot of hardwood here, so in the winter it is a little more gray and drab and brown. We still have green pine trees though, so there is some greenery around. And then on the west side of Huntsville, outside of Rainbow Mountain, it is all farmland, or it's neighborhoods that are on what used to be farmland. So if you see a corn row or cotton row there, think of in 5 years, there'll probably be a neighborhood on it. So a lot of flat land over here. A little bit of hills, stuff like that, but by and large, really flat land. So you're not getting mountain views over in most of Madison, Athens, Harvest, places like that. Now, there are some places with existing tree lines. There's a lot of water over here. It's not hard to live on a pond, a lake, or a creek in this area. But mountain views, you're really looking at the east side of Huntsville. All right, I hope that answers all your questions. Try to be as forthcoming as possible and give you the real dope on what's going on here in Huntsville. I've got a lot of videos on this channel, especially my 7 reasons not to move to Huntsville. That is my top performing video because I really do go into the nitty gritty of the problems and the drawbacks of living here, as well as a way to mitigate those if you still plan on moving here after hearing them. Thanks for